Hello, I'm Richard Fusniak, also known as Fuzzy, and I'm webmaster for Robert Bauval. Today I'm going to talk to him about a new book which he's writing, and it's called Black Genesis. Hello, Robert.
Hi, Fuzzy. Yeah, I'm glad you're raising the question about my next book, which is going to be co-authored with Thomas Brophy, the American astrophysicist. Tom and I got together a couple of years ago because of a discovery that was made in the Sahara, which has now taken us on a huge research project, and it's culminating in this book that we're about to begin writing and should be available in about 7 or 8 months' time. As the title implies, Black Genesis, let me say from the outset that we are going to put evidence, hard physical evidence, that will show that the ancient Egyptian civilization is the result of the incoming of another culture that lived in the Sahara, what the Egyptians call today the Western Desert, of black origins, a prehistoric culture that had developed all the requirements of civilization that we had previously thought was attributed only to the ancient Egyptians. So this is basically the task of this book, is to prove that the origins of ancient Egypt comes from black African prehistoric cultures. Having said this, one of the center points of our book and research so far has been a region called Napta Playa. You remember we talked about this a lot in Egypt when you were there.
Yes, it's in the south part of Egypt near the border of Sudan.
Yes, correct. It is a region that is roughly about 100 kilometers west of Abu Simbel, totally unknown until the late 1970s, when it was discovered by a group of American anthropologists. But it took quite a long time until the late 90s to realize that it was not just a prehistoric site, which there are many, by the way, in the Sahara, but a prehistoric site with a big difference. And that difference is that there is abundant evidence of a culture that performed complex religious ceremonies associated to the sky. One of the centerpieces is a so-called calendar circle, a kind of mini Stonehenge that has been dated to about 6000 BC. That means about 3000 years before the construction of pyramids in Egypt, which has astronomical alignments to the summer solstice and also, as Thomas Brophy has shown, to the constellation of Orion, very much like the great pyramids of the Giza necropolis have. Now, this demonstrates a bit, it's a sort of a bit like the Dead Sea Scrolls, you know, when we had thought that the sayings of Jesus were original to him, and suddenly the Dead Sea Scrolls showed that in fact they weren't, and that at least 100 years before, the very same ideas were being practiced by the Essenes word by word. Well, this is what we're finding in Egypt, except we're finding that what we thought was original to the pyramid builders was in fact practiced by a prehistoric black African culture in the Sahara thousands of years before.
So they were really Black Stone Age people.
Stone Age in a sense, because they manipulated stone. We see them more as what anthropologists call a Neolithic culture, a culture coming out of the Stone Age and settling down and beginning the very roots that eventually will lead to civilization. For example, the domestication of cattle, the beginning of agriculture, but more importantly, the developing of social structures and religious ideologies that are the basis of any developed culture that spawns into a civilized form. So in a sense, here in the desert, thousands of years before, a black African people literally seeded the very seed that would eventually be planted in the Nile Valley by them leaving the desert when it became super arid about 5,000 years ago and moving into the Nile Valley with their cargo of knowledge and kickstarting the pharaonic civilization. So from the rudimentary megalithic ceremonial astronomical sites that we found at Nabta Playa eventually leads to the construction of pyramids and temples. So we found the thread, if you like. And this is what this book is going to be about, to literally present this physical evidence. But what's more is now that we realize that this particular culture that centered around the Nabta Playa region probably was very much diffused in the Sahara, in the southwest of Egypt, because we found evidence of their presence far, far, far in the southwest, about 700 kilometers from Abu Simbel, on the extreme limits of Egypt, where the borders of Sudan and Libya are encountered, in a very, very mysterious region called Jebel Uwainat and Gilf al-Kebir. There is an abundance of rock art, which literally shows us in images painted by the very people, by the very black, mysterious stargazers of Nabta, and showing us how they looked like. And it's pretty impressive. They seem very sophisticated. They lived in large communities. They obviously had herded large groups of domesticated animals, cattle in particular, and had begun agriculture. And so there you are. The missing link, if you like, to the pharaonic civilization and the explanation of how this pharaonic civilization seemed so far to have sprung literally from nowhere. Well, it didn't. It seems to have inherited thousands of years of knowledge that was imported by these people into the Nile Valley at about 3,500 BC or so. So there you have it.
There must have been sources of water there for it to be a very fertile place, surely?
Indeed, and this is the key, in fact, to understand what happened, is that in prehistoric times, roughly between 20,000 BC and 5,000 BC, the Sahara was a very, very fertile place with ups and downs. There was moments of aridity and moments of fertility. But the last phase of fertility, which lasted roughly between 8,000 BC and 3,000 BC, saw the formation of temporary lakes, of huge pastures and prairies, ideal for human habitation, with water in abundance, particularly in the summer season, in the monsoon season. The water, in fact, came literally from Central Africa, not via the river Nile, which eventually was the case for the Nile Valley, but by the rains. The rains would, in those days, spread much further north and discharge huge volumes of water in the Sahara, forming these lakes which would last several months and which would provide all the necessary water for these prehistoric people to exist. However, the climate changed radically at about 5,000 BC or so, and gradually the desert became super arid, impossible to exist. And this is when this prehistoric culture suddenly disappears, and when we have at exactly that moment the appearance of the pharaonic civilization. So clearly the twain meet, and it is becoming more and more obvious that it is this prehistoric black culture that injected its knowledge into the Nile Valley and caused the pharaonic civilization.
Well, Robert, this sounds like a very exciting book, and it looks like you've researched this with Thomas Brophy very thoroughly. I'm looking forward to reading this myself, and I'm sure your readers will too. We've not got much more time, Robert. Just a few more seconds left. Would you like to sum up?
Well, that's the broad view of the book. Of course, there's going to be a lot more in this book because we're going to examine the physical, cultural connections between the pharaonic civilization and this black prehistoric race. But we're also going to be looking at all the astronomical sites that we found in the deserts and trace them literally from the prehistoric times all the way to the pharaonic civilization. So it's a huge task. Most of the research is done, and the book will be ready to launch in about the beginning of winter 2009.
Well, good luck with your new book, Robert, and thank you very much for your insights into it.
It was a pleasure, Fuzzy.